Good morning, everybody. My name is Allison Hess. I'm the Vice President of Health and Wellness for Geisinger. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this webinar on COVID vaccines. I wanted to initially start off with just kind of giving an update. At Geisinger, we've provided over 295,000 doses of COVID vaccine. So we've been at this journey since the middle of December when we started with our employee population, and we're continuing to offer those services to the community. But also a big part of our initiative is to really make sure that we're providing resources and education, offering up some of our experts in the field to be able to answer questions for our employees, our employer groups that we work with, our community members. And so we're really honored to be able to have this opportunity to talk with you all today about vaccines. I want to start off by introducing Dr. Allison Brzezinski, who is an Associate Chief Medical Officer. She also oversees our infectious diseases programs and our public health preparedness. She's been instrumental in this process and has worked closely with all of the COVID preparedness, but also with the vaccine rollout. So we've asked her to come today to be available to give an update on where we stand with vaccinations, but also to be available to answer any of the questions that you all may have. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Dr. Brzezinski for her to offer some additional information about vaccination trends and other important information.
Really great to be here. Thank you, Allison. I think these are exactly the types of forums that we all need to make sure that we can deliver all of you, accurate, reputable information. Now's the time to ask those questions. The goal of this really is to give you guys, the most updated information that we have. And hopefully if there's any of you out there that are hesitant or perhaps maybe on the fence in terms of should I get a vaccination or should I wait, I'm hoping to alleviate any of those concerns or questions. So, I guess we can go ahead and let's get started. Please. So where are we? This is a great graph, guys. It's showing us the vaccination trends in the United States. And it's amazing to think that the first dose of the COVID vaccine administered in the United States was back around 5 months ago, December 14th of 2020. And looking here on the left-hand side, we've administered over 286 million doses so far in the United States. In this last 5-month time frame. Kind of moving over to the right side, that's going to give us roughly 49% of our total population that has received at least one dose. Those that are fully vaccinated is right around a little less than 40%. And we're looking at the people who are vaccinated or the population, keeping in mind when we first started vaccinating individuals, we had these different tiering systems or phases or groups. And, it was heavily focused on those who had older age, severe comorbidities, that fell into certain job functions, for example, those that high risk job titles like in a hospital or working in a nursing home. And we've really expanded that now really everyone, adults and those ages 12 to, I should actually say those 12 and above are now eligible for vaccination. And as these eligibility opens up, we're really seeing, a huge increase in our percentage of who's fully vaccinated. And that's really, really important to look at these percentages when we get into the next slide, where we'll talk about something, called herd immunity. But really focusing on here, you can see that percentage of population more than 65 years of age, they were heavily targeted because, again, these were our high-risk individuals. And so we're slowly now coming down into the younger population. It's really important that we start focusing on this group for several reasons. One, because, the age group that we're now starting to see perhaps is the highest group that's getting COVID and even coming into our hospital. It is the younger population because, again, it was that older population who was, initially receiving those vaccines and now have that nice protective immunity. And getting this vaccine out to the younger population, the great news is we're starting to see those numbers decline in the younger age groups of those who are contracting COVID, and thankfully those who are coming into the hospital with severe symptoms. 2 weeks ago, Pfizer did receive something called an EUA, or an emergency use authorization, for those in ages 12 to 15. And that rollout has been going phenomenally well. Within the first week of when that came out, there was over 600,000 doses administered, safely administered to this group. In Pennsylvania, we're going strong. We've administered over 12 million doses of the vaccine, and we're going to continue to go strong so that we can get through this pandemic together. Next slide, please. When we were looking at those percentages on the previous slide, it was important to really see where these different age groups are and where we are as a whole in the United States, because of something called herd immunity. And I'm sure some of you may have heard that term. And it's basically the idea of how many people in a certain population are immune, or basically protected to a certain virus or disease. So that if one person in that community gets infected, it really doesn't have anywhere to spread, because there's enough people around them who are, again, protected or immune from that virus. And with SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus that causes COVID-19, we know that we need around 60, perhaps even 70% of a population to be immune or protected of this virus in order to really start feeling those cases coming down. And again, I think it's really an important understanding that, the more people we have who are immune or protected to this virus, we're going to start shutting down that replication. The virus isn't going to have anywhere to go because those around us are protected. When looking at, Pennsylvania, it's estimated that around a little over 17% of our population had, this natural immunity. And again, we really need to have this higher, 60, really 70% range that we want to be protected. And that's where vaccination comes into play. Vaccination does obviously give us a protective immunity, as well as those who had infection gives you natural immunity. But even after natural infection, that immunity can wane over time. We don't really have a good understanding of the robustness or perhaps the level protection you get after you've had the infection, or how long that's going to last. We do have a much better understanding of those parameters and those that are protected because of the vaccine, and we'll get into some of that. A common question I sometimes get is, do I still have to get the vaccine even if I've had the actual infection, back in April of 2020 or May of 2020? And the answer is yes. It's really important to go out and get that vaccination. One of the big reasons, again, is what I stated earlier, because we don't understand how long that immunity will last after a natural infection, or how the degree of your protection. Another issue is something called a variant, which is basically, the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. There's a mutation. And we know of a couple of different variants, which I'm sure some of you have heard in the news or on the media, the B117 or the UK variant, the South African variant, or the P1, the Brazil. These variants occur because as a virus is allowed to replicate, mutations happen, mistakes happen when it's making a copy of itself. Sometimes these mistakes don't mean anything. Sometimes they just go away. But occasionally these mistakes can cause certain strains of this virus to become more infectious. Sometimes it can cause more severe disease. So again, the really important way that we stop these variants from forming is to stop the replication. As we said before, the way that we stop replication is to stop the spread of the virus. And the way we do that, obviously, is to get this nice herd immunity. Next slide, please. There's many reasons, I think, why individuals, including myself, when you're thinking of anything novel that's coming out, that you sit back and think, okay, let me have a good understanding of what this certain medication is going to do, or this medical therapy, or perhaps this vaccine is going to do. And, the vaccine for COVID-19 is no different. Looking here, you can see common reasons that individuals gave why maybe they have some hesitancy, or they did not want to get the vaccine if it was offered. And, you can see a lot of it really falls into the category of, I just don't know enough about it, or how do I know that it's safe, or that I can trust this? What about my specific scenario that I'm, perhaps I'm pregnant, and, I need a little bit more information there. So I think a lot of it falls into that category again of just, I need a little more information. And hopefully today that's the idea, that we can give you some of that information. The vaccines first started coming out. It was interesting that there were so many individuals that said, where can I get this? Where it was almost like a lottery that we were able to get someone, winning the lottery, I should say, that we were able to get someone a vaccine. They were so happy and so thrilled, but now we're kind of moving into a state where we have enough vaccines, so many sites set up, we have so many different sources and resources that we can get you the vaccine. And we're now being faced by kind of this idea of hesitancy. So the supply is certainly there, but the demand is coming down. And it is, again, for some of these reasons that we're seeing here on the left-hand side of the screen. The percentage of our adults who are unvaccinated is remaining constant, around that 20 to 30% range. And again, it's really important, again, to really reach minimum 70% of that herd immunity. And the higher we get of those that are vaccinated, the more protective our entire community is going to be. Next slide, please. COVID-19, it's a very interesting respiratory virus. It's something, and to be quite honest, I've never seen anything like this before. Working in infectious diseases, obviously, I'm not immune to pretty severe respiratory viral infections. But COVID-19 is one of these infections that, some people do go on and they have some cold-like symptoms and they recover. But we now know a lot more about COVID-19. And unfortunately, it causes, a lot of these long-term side effects. It affects a lot of other organ systems than just your lungs or what we call your respiratory tract. And this is unique for COVID-19. It's not similar. I think some people in the past may have compared it to influenza or the flu. It's very different from that. It's not just affecting or causing damage to that respiratory tract, but can cause a lot of end organ damage outside of there. There's a lot more information and understanding coming out now on these individuals that we call long haulers, or these long-term effects that can last weeks to months after someone has the infection COVID-19. There was one study where they looked at almost 500 patients who were sick enough that they did require hospitalization. More than half of that population had at least one symptom that continued for months later that they did not have pre-COVID. When you're looking, at the different types of symptoms that were common, we're seeing a lot of these cognitive, or what we call, psychiatric. So brain fog, extremely common. I see a lot of patients, still that were some of my patients I saw early on in the pandemic, and they continue to say, my memory is not where it was. I'm having daily headaches. A lot of anxiety and depression are the common psychiatric symptoms that we're seeing weeks, if not months later. Not to be surprised, dysfunctional breathing, or again, these long-term effects of the respiratory tract or of your lungs. even or what we call fibrotic lesions, so scarring of that lung tissue that unfortunately, we don't really have a solution to. Once scarring forms, it's essentially just dead tissue. So again, I think that there was initially this thought process that, yeah, this is a respiratory tract infection. We all understand influenza. We understand, other types of common respiratory diseases. And, we get sick and we get better. Unfortunately, like I said, guys, COVID is one of these disease processes that we have to be extremely cautious with, because not everyone is that lucky one that just gets sick, feels a little ill, and then gets better. The amount of these types of long hauler cases, unfortunately, are continuing to increase as we're getting weeks, if not months out from when they were initially ill. So something that we're continuing to keep a really close eye on in the healthcare community, and continuing to get a better understanding of how do we help these individuals and how do we treat them. But I can tell you, almost every single patient that I have, that have these long-term effects, if they were to say I can go back in time and if a vaccine was available and I did not contract COVID, when this first came out, I would have received that vaccine. So we have that in front of us now. The vaccine is one of the best things we can do so that we're not falling into these categories of these long haulers. Next slide, please. There are currently 3 vaccines in the United States with an FDA authorization. They've all been out for several months now. So we continue to gather, obviously, long-term safety information, continue to be safe. They continue to be extremely effective. Sometimes I have individuals ask, well, which one should I get? Doc, there's 3 different ones available. And again, it's interesting, we are in a place now that perhaps we can kind of look around and shop around to see what we would like. So there's, like I had said, 3 different vaccines currently available in the US, the Moderna, Pfizer, and then the one that we call kind of the one and done, Johnson & Johnson. So Moderna and Pfizer, they're not identical, but they're quite similar. They both use similar technology to really boost that immune system. So they're mRNA vaccines. Johnson & Johnson is a little bit of a different. It uses something called a viral vector to deliver that material to, again, mount your antibody or immune response. Moderna and Pfizer do require 2 doses, whereas the Johnson & Johnson does require 1. All 3 of them are extremely effective at preventing that really severe courses of hospitalization and obviously, death. It is recommended at this time, you can do some shopping around. The Pennsylvania Department of Health has a really nice website that you can look to see where vaccines are available and what manufacturer is available where. But obviously, the best thing you can do is get that vaccine that's available for you today. And, go make sure you're going to reputable sites like the Pennsylvania Department of Health, the CDC, even Geisinger, to look and see, what is the most up-to-date information that's out there for these vaccinations, and then obviously where you can receive one. The CDC just a few weeks ago also started relaxing some of these mitigation measures that were in place to help slow down the spread of COVID-19 for those that are vaccinated. So now those that are vaccinated are kind of in a little bit of a different class in terms of where they can mask and where they can unmask. So we now have an understanding that being outside is a good place to be, which is great. We're coming upon the summer months, so we know that outside having a lot of circulating air, event someone even is positive, a lot of those viral particles just basically dissipate around you. So indoors as well, for those that are fully vaccinated, we understand this is a pretty safe place to be. So gathering with those, having an understanding of, who's around you, who's vaccinated, really start letting our guard down a bit for those that have the vaccine, in terms of social distancing and masking. When we talk about the idea of being fully vaccinated, I think it's also important that we understand that is going to be at that 2-week mark after you've received either the second dose of Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer, or after 2 weeks of receiving the 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson. So, it takes a little bit of time for your body to really ramp up that immune response and give you that nice protective antibodies. So it doesn't happen day one, after your first dose. And it's also important that we understand if you are receiving either the Pfizer or the Moderna, that get those 2 doses. 1 dose of either the Pfizer or the Moderna is going to put you at about a 50% protective range 2 weeks after that first dose. And it really isn't until 2 weeks after your second dose when your body's going to boost up to that 95% range. So again, really important to understand, what does that mean when someone is fully vaccinated? And why do I really need that second dose of the Pfizer or Moderna? Because you're only, you're really getting gypped in terms of your immunity if you only go and receive the 1 dose. The other big change from the CDC is those of us that are fully vaccinated, if we're exposed to someone who has COVID-19, we don't have to quarantine, assuming we do not have any symptoms at all. And that's a huge change. I think a lot of us really felt that, when the virus was really circulating and there were a lot of exposures, there was a lot of cases in the community, in our workplace. It causes a lot of, obviously, disruption to your daily life, to have to quarantine and, take off time for 2 weeks. So again, those that are fully vaccinated and have an exposure, assuming you have no symptoms, no longer have to quarantine. Next slide.
Okay, so I'll pick it back up here. Thank you, Dr. Brzezinski. Really appreciate your insight there. And we're going to move into a couple common questions that I think both of us have received over the last couple weeks. And hopefully these will get at some of those underlying questions that are still out there, but then we'll also provide some additional information and open up for other questions coming in. So the first question that we get a lot of is, what is the biggest challenge for getting vaccines to the public? And I think, one of the challenges that we've faced is that the vaccine has a lot of logistics that are involved, very different than a flu shot where we would typically have those drawn up or even in pre-filled syringes, and we can pack them in a cooler and hit the road. We can do them in drive-thrus, we can take them to employer groups. But because we are primarily using Pfizer at Geisinger, it does require some additional logistics. Things that people don't realize, that when we open the freezer to get a vial out, we can't reopen that door for another 2 hours. That they have to thaw within a certain time frame, and once thawed, those vials only have 5 days until they expire. And from the time we put a needle in that vial to draw the vaccine out, we have 5 to 6 doses per vial, and those doses expire in 6 hours from the time that we puncture that vial. So all of those things, even just in how the vaccine is procured, really make it somewhat challenging, logistically challenging. And then additionally, because it is a 2-dose regimen, making sure that we can ensure that people get those second doses, that's a really critical component as well. So those are some of the challenges that we've had with mobilizing the vaccine. Now, we do know that we have some pilots in flight. We'll talk a little bit about that to try and help see how we can continue to remove some of those barriers. But it has definitely been a challenge. And that's why we've taken the approach to do the vaccination sites. We've stood up 4 vaccination sites across the footprint. And at our peak, we were churning out anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 shots a day across those locations. And that was really because we actually stood up a pharmacy prep area right in those facilities where we were able to repurpose GHP offices or use tents So we had the space to be able to allow people to wait for 15 minutes. That's another logistic issue that we don't normally have. So every person has to wait and be observed. And again, maintaining social distancing and capacity requirements. Those are all some of the factors, but I think we've worked through a lot of that over the last couple months, and we're really excited about the path forward and how we can continue to provide these to the public. I think, Allison, you did a great job covering why it's important for people to get vaccinated, but do you have any just additional comments for why we do really want to make sure that people do get vaccinated?
Yeah, Allison, I think the only other point that I want to talk about is this idea of side effects. So we know many benefits of vaccinations that I think that we went through, and these benefits are going to significantly outweigh any temporary or really safe side effects that you may feel, after vaccination. When we say these side effects, these COVID vaccines are what we call reactogenic, and it basically means that your body is going to kind of feel your immune system ramping up. And again, it's important to know these side effects or reactogenic effects are safe and they are temporary. Common ones include pain at the injection site, fever, body aches, occasionally headaches. There are extremely, or I should say, much more common after your second dose if you are receiving either the Pfizer or the Moderna. And they typically last about 24 to 48 hours. Those symptoms, they can be relieved with over-the-counter acetaminophen or ibuprofen. But again, I think there occasionally can be some hesitancy because people say, well, I don't want to feel sick. There's all of the COVID vaccines in the market on the United States do not contain any live virus. These vaccines cannot give you COVID. But again, it's just basically your immune system doing what it's supposed to do, which is to make that nice antibody response. So, the benefits you are going to get from this vaccine far exceed any temporary or, again, safe side effects that you may feel.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And then the next question I'll also ask you to weigh in on. Are people's preferences for a certain type of vaccine legitimate? And how can individuals find where they can get a specific vaccine if they do have something that they want to specifically look for?
Yeah, I do think, someone's preference is legitimate. And it's good to attend these types of town halls to get the information. Again, it's good to visit reputable sites, reputable resources like the PADOH, CDC, and Geisinger's website to learn more about what types of vaccines are available and where you can get them. Everyone has a choice at this time, which is a little bit of a different place than where we were a few weeks ago or even, a few months ago. Some individuals, I have some patients that say, look, I'm really busy. I travel a lot for work. I really don't have the time to schedule 2 doses. Where can I get my Johnson & Johnson? And then I have other individuals who say, I'm a young female. I read about these potential, again, extremely small number of cases that someone developed a blood clot with low platelets. And, I just don't know if Johnson & Johnson's right for me. Where can I get my Pfizer or where can I get my Moderna? One of the best resources that's available right now, guys, is the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And it's, again, a reputable site. And you can check out where all the different vaccine manufacturers are currently being distributed in our area.
Thank you. Another question we get is, do I have to get my first and second dose at the same place? Now, early on in this process, it really was important to do your first and second doses in the same place. However, now with new guidance from the Department of Health, we're able to provide second doses to people who did not receive their first dose at Geisinger. So if people receive their first dose somewhere else but still need a second dose, they can sign up for a second dose appointment. The only thing we would ask is if you do have a first dose appointment with us and you have a second dose appointment scheduled, but for some reason you get your second dose somewhere else, it's really important that you cancel that appointment with us. It presents some challenges, again, logistically, as we're drawing up vaccine to make sure that we don't waste any vaccine, and also to offer up that availability to other individuals who may still want vaccinated. So there has been a change, and we can do that, but we just ask that if for some reason you don't keep that second dose appointment, that you make sure you cancel it with whoever you have that appointment with. This has really been a team sport throughout this pandemic, and so we just want people to get vaccinated, and we're doing everything we can to make that as easy as possible. So then the last section, Dr. Brzezinski, as far as the reasons people have not been getting vaccinated or what we've been hearing, if you could just go through and address some of those areas, I think that would be great for this group.
Yeah, absolutely. We touched a little bit on that idea of these side effects, or what we call reactogenic effects. I can tell you personally, when I received my COVID vaccine after the first dose, I felt a little achy and a little fatigued. And then when I went back for my second dose, it was about 24 hours later where I really felt tired. I felt a little feverish, felt some body aches. I hydrated. I took some ibuprofen. I lay down, and the next morning I woke up and I felt like a brand new person. I joked a little bit and said I embraced it. I embraced my immune response, because that's exactly what it is. It's your immune system basically forming those protective antibodies. Again, these side effects are safe and they're temporary. It's not to say if a certain individual does not feel anything after the vaccine, we tend to say, well, you're the lucky one. So there's really no correlation per se with the degree of side effects that you may feel and the amount of protection that you're receiving. But again, they're safe and they're temporary. Some of the concerns, I think, also lie around this long-term safety and the vaccine. Did it come to market too quickly? We've never had a vaccine come out here, and I'll start with that one. There's many reasons why we were able to get a safe and effective vaccine out to the public in a short amount of time. Many reasons. One is we're in a different place, scientifically and in a technology world than where we were, many years ago, during pandemics, decades ago. China was able to isolate the genetic code and really share it with the world very early on in the pandemic. And that's key, because it's really key to understanding what is this virus made up of, and how do we develop a vaccine to target the important areas of that virus, what we call, to make something called a neutralizing antibody. Again, an antibody that's going to be able to go in and destroy that virus. So that was, I think step number one, again, is having that technology now to really be able to understand that genetic material earlier on. The idea of mRNA technology is not new. It's been around for several decades. And, we were able to take all of the information that we had and understanding about mRNA technology in vaccine development and really start deploying it. It's been studied for almost 2 decades for this type of scenario. What do we do if a pandemic happens? We were able, again, to take that information and start using it to start making a vaccine. There was something called Operation Warp Speed, which also was a huge player in getting a vaccine out to the public so quickly. And the idea of Operation Warp Speed was a lot of people stacking hands. So, it was the government, it was pharmaceutical companies. There was billions of dollars that were pushed into resources to basically say to the pharmaceutical companies, guys, we'll eliminate your financial risk in this. Let's just start working together and let's start looking at the data and making sure that we can get something safe on the table. So typically during vaccine development, it takes years just to start recruitment, just to get enough people in a study that when you're deriving the information, it statistically makes sense, because obviously we wouldn't be able to have a study with 10 people and be able to draw a conclusion from it. With this pandemic, there were so many individuals interested in getting in these vaccine trials, because they obviously understood that, this is the way that we start getting out of this thing. I think social media played a big role in that. Again, getting individuals interested and involved in these trials. So we were able to have tens of thousands of people very quickly to say, yeah, I'm in for this trial, which again, years ago, that it takes years to do. Again, the idea of eliminating that financial risk to the pharmaceutical companies, historically, when vaccine trials take place, they take place in stages. So they say, okay, let's get the study participants and let's look to see where we are. And when we look at the data, does it look good? Should we invest more money and kind of go on to stage 2? The government basically eliminated, that financial risk and said, hey, let's start doing stages along with one another, so that they're happening in succession. And so by the time we were able to start looking through all the safety data, we were already in the manufacturing phase. Again, something that, historically would not have been able to do, because we were never able to have the amount of money and resources put into something. So then the idea that it came out too quickly, I can tell you first-handedly, there were no safety steps skipped. If anything, I've never encountered any type of even post study safety surveillance that the CDC continues to do with these vaccines. It's just unprecedented. We've never had this type of information being gathered. And the great news is, again, we're the first trial for Pfizer started, almost a year ago, last July. And we're still seeing the excellent safety profile that we saw, over a year ago. Again, the CDC is being a really strict eye on this. I've never seen them do something like this before, which is good. And anything that pops on their radar, I think they're being extremely transparent about and letting us know about. But again, everything still looks great, still safe and effective vaccines. The effects on fertility and pregnancy, there was a lot of confusion that was sparked with this fertility idea that came out on social media. And there was a discussion that the antibody that's created to a spike protein on the virus SARS-CoV-2 is identical to a spike protein that's found in a growing placenta in a female. I can tell you guys that is absolutely false. They are not identical. They're not even similar proteins. So it's really unfortunate that this type of information gets out there, and it's tough to debunk it once it's out. But they are not identical. They're actually not even similar proteins. The protein the spike protein that came out in the social media ad, months ago about this fertility is something called syncytin-1, and again, it's a protein produced by the placenta. The antibody that's created to this vaccine or even to this virus, there's no cross-reactivity. There was several women, almost 30 women, who were included in the initial Pfizer studies and who were not pregnant when they first entered the trial and became pregnant. And we know out of all those pregnancies, there was one who ended in miscarriage, and that female actually was in the placebo group. So we know that COVID vaccination is completely safe for any female who is interested in becoming pregnant in the future. And this is also true for in vitro fertilization. It does not impact fertility. In terms of pregnancy, a lot of really great information coming out of those that are already pregnant and then receiving the vaccination. And we're seeing that there's really good protective immunity that is coming to the baby, so that they are getting antibodies similar to the other vaccines that we administer to pregnant women. And there is absolutely no reason to think that it's causing any types of ill effect to that pregnant mom or to that child, or excuse me, to that fetus, to that baby. We do know that the actual infection, though, COVID-19 infection in pregnancy, does cause much more severe effects to that mom, increases in hospitalizations, and even increases in death. So COVID-19 infection in a pregnant woman can be extremely severe. They are considered a high-risk group. So really important. The CDC, ACOG, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, really big organizations completely support pregnant females receiving that COVID vaccine. Don't have enough time, not enough options. I think that this was a common reason months ago when we really didn't have a lot of options in terms of availability, where you can go. It's just a different game now. There are 3 different vaccines available. Some individuals like that idea of the one and done Johnson & Johnson, and it certainly is an appropriate vaccine candidate for many individuals. Some individuals do prefer, nope, I'm good with I'll schedule a 2-dose vaccine. And again, we now have the availability for those individuals to do so. So I'm not seeing this one as a common reason any longer, which is a great thing. And then the last, which I think was one of the earliest misconceptions that was out there about the vaccine, is that it can impact my DNA. And I believe that idea came around because we hear of, Moderna and Pfizer are mRNA, and it has to be able to get incorporated into someone's DNA. Completely false. mRNA is basically a recipe. It's the recipe that gets delivered, and it tells your own cells, this is how you make a spike protein, and then your body produces an antibody to it. The mRNA never enters the nucleus of your cell. That's where DNA is stored in the nucleus of our cells. mRNA never enters there. It is impossible for it to become incorporated into our DNA or alter our DNA in any way. mRNA is also extremely fragile. So, it doesn't last that long in our body. It's broken down fairly quickly. So, after our body is able to make that spike protein, and then we produce the antibody against it, the mRNA basically is dissolved. So it doesn't hang out long at all. So, hopefully these were the common questions, or maybe, misconceptions that some of you needed some clarity on. And it's great to know that I think the 2 big ones in terms of the fertility and the DNA, they're hopefully you walk away with a better understanding that they are completely false claims. As a female, as a mom of a daughter, I can tell you that I would never, not do my homework or due diligence in looking into this. And I would never give my daughter or even myself something that I was concerned about. Scientifically, there's just no way that these can cause effects on fertility or, again, your DNA.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brzezinski. I know those are some key questions that a lot of people have. Just 2 more that I think are relevant here, and then we'll just go through a couple slides and wrap up here to be able to take some additional questions. But we often get the question of how long are the vaccines effective for, and also if there's a booster. Can you just speak to those 2 questions as well?
Sure. So we know that vaccine efficacy and durability is going to last at least 6 months, and to be honest, likely considerably more. But we just have information up to that 6-month mark at this time, and it's showing us that vaccine is still doing what it's supposed to do. I don't know if a lot of you recall, we started giving information back at that 3-month mark where we said, looks great, the durability is still there, the efficacy is still there. We'll keep you guys posted at the 6-month mark when we're able to review the data. We were able to review that data because we have the time now, and because we're at that 6-month out mark, and it still looks good. So we'll continue to update when we get more and more information in terms of, well, how much longer after 6 months. I do think, though, we will likely require a booster sometime within a year. So it's important for everyone to kind of think of that timeline. You know, when did I get my COVID vaccine? You know, when is kind of that year mark? Because obviously it's going to be different for all of us. But I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if there may be a booster that's required, you know, some point within that year mark. And then moving forward, it's tough to say, but if I had to kind of take a stab at it, I would anticipate, just like we do for influenza, there likely would be then probably an annual vaccination around COVID-19.
Thank you so much for that. So just on the next slide, we're going to talk really quickly about, you know, where there are community-based clinics. If for some reason people are still looking to get vaccinated, we do have locations in Pittston, Danville, Jersey Shore, and Lewistown. We've done some targeted strategies up until this point, really reaching out to the 65+ population. We've partnered with community-based organizations and school districts. We've also partnered with federally qualified health centers. We are piloting some employer and nursing home strategies to see where we can potentially look to do that in the coming months. And then have recently allowed those pediatric appointments, because we do have Pfizer. We're now available for 12 to 17-year-olds at all of our facilities. So did put some information on there. I also want to note that we do have walk-in appointments, or walk-ins now available with no appointment. So anybody can walk into any of those locations if they're interested in getting a vaccine. And then again, just if anybody does have children, as Dr. Brzezinski mentioned, my own children are vaccinated. They each have their first dose, and my daughter's got her second dose this past weekend. We did make all of the adjustments within our facilities. We have pediatric staff on site at those facilities. So if anybody has any questions, there's folks from the pediatric team that are there and available to help. We're also trying to get some information and education out to the school districts as well to try and promote vaccinations for this age group. And we have all of the updated information at all the clinic sites. We're piloting some pediatric clinic sites as well. And so that's our strategy and our move forward as we've expanded to this 12+ population. So with that, I'll open it up to any of the questions that came in during the presentation.
Thanks, Allison. We got some really great questions. One of the questions was about how would you compare older vaccines like the chickenpox vaccine with COVID vaccinations?
Dr. Brzezinski, I'll have you address that one.
Sure. So, you know, they are completely different types of technology in terms of, you know, the way it's boosting your immune response. And, you know, the vaccine in itself is going to be looked at a little bit differently because there are different viruses. You know, a lot of respiratory viruses are quickly replicating viruses, meaning there's increased chances that a mutation or a variant can come out of it, which is a little different than, you know, the varicella zoster, which causes the disease chickenpox. So there's really not a lot of chances that, you know, it's going to mutate or it's going to change. So, you know, vaccination for chickenpox tends to occur when you're a child, or in my case, I, you know, actually had the disease and developed my immunity. And it's really the same type of virus that's still out there. So easy to elicit that nice antibody response and move on. Respiratory viruses like SARS-CoV-2 and influenza, you know, A and B, they're quickly replicating. So they like to change and to mutate. So there's different strains or variants, if you will, that can come out, and your body learns to basically, or excuse me, the virus learns how to evade the immune response or the antibodies response you have. So that's why they tend to require annual immunizations. But again, with COVID-19, you know, time will tell. If we can get a handle on this, we can start shutting down this replication, then obviously we start shutting down the idea that variants can continue to spread. So perhaps maybe even less than, or you know, annual vaccinations, which would be great.
Do you see that once we get through the emergency use period that the vaccine will become mandatory?
Yeah, so I don't foresee that it will necessarily become mandatory. I think that's a lot of times often up to the employer. Now, there are some states where healthcare systems and other employers are requiring it, but I think that's really, at this point, everything we've seen, it's been up to the employer to make that determination.
We had a question from someone who had COVID-19 and received monoclonal antibodies. They're wondering if they have to wait 90 days before receiving the second vaccine.
Dr. Brzezinski, can you take that one?
Sure. Yes, we do require a waiting period of 90 days after someone who's had the virus COVID-19 or the disease COVID-19 and received either monoclonal antibody infusions, which we do infuse as outpatients, or for those that required hospitalization and infuse something called convalescent plasma. So you do need to wait 90 days to either get your first dose, or if you're in between dosing and you contracted COVID and received those infusions, you need to wait 90 days to get that second dose. And the reason for that is, these are basically antibodies that we're infusing into you. And there is a theoretical, it has never been proven, but there's a theoretical risk that you can have a little bit of, an immune response that can become dysregulated if you administer that COVID vaccine too quickly from when you already gave them antibodies. But it is safe to wait. I think some people are hesitant and say, well, can I really wait that 90 days? Or do I have to restart the series if I've already had a dose and I'm in between my second dose? You can wait. And we have a lot more information coming out on that saying it's completely safe. No reason to restart that series. You can wait those 90 days.
I have a question about someone who has lost their sense of smell and taste, and it's been over 6 months since that occurred, wondering how likely that is that it will change and they'll get it back.
Dr. Brzezinski?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of patients that are falling into this category, and, my heart goes out to you because, it may sound like a simple, unpleasant side effect, but it really is kind of debilitating, even life-changing. Can you imagine you can't smell or taste anything? I had a patient last week who said, Doc, I take a bite of a lemon and nothing. I put some salt on my tongue, nothing. Unfortunately, we just don't know how long that can potentially last for. I have had some individuals that have had it out to 8 weeks later and are now starting to regain some sense of smell or some sense of taste. And I've had, others that may be similar to this individual posing this question that said, look, I'm months out. Any sense of when this can return. Unfortunately, we just don't know yet. The hope is obviously that we start to get some regrowth of that sensation and, those nerves in that area, and you start to taste and smell again. But unfortunately, just don't have that information yet.
Well, and a related question, if you've had increased tiredness, brain fog, those type of symptoms, any idea on how long until those effects are gone?
Similar answer. This is a new virus, and as I feel, every month or so, we're gaining more and more information on it. But we're still kind of in that earlier phase where we haven't had a whole year in for even some individuals that are having kind of these long hauler effects where we can say, let's look at the study population, let's look at the data, and on average we're starting to see cessation of some of these long hauler symptoms 8 to 9 months later. We just don't know yet. There are a lot of organizations, hospital organizations, including Geisinger, that are looking into, these what we call long hauler clinics to really start understanding what is going on and how can we help some of these unusual long-lasting symptoms that are coming out of COVID. So it's great to know that the medical community is coming together to start figuring out and getting you guys some answers. The unfortunate part is at this time, we just don't know.
What does the data show for those who are vaccinated and then get COVID? What % of them are seriously ill or result in death?
So I can tell you within our own population, which again is a small snippet, it's a small subset. Of those that were vaccinated within Geisinger and then got COVID, we've had 0 deaths. We have had, some individuals that were picking up on screening tests because maybe they're going to travel and they're getting tested for COVID. They're fully vaccinated and they test positive and they don't even realize it. And unfortunately, we've had some that have been symptomatic. But we know that this is what vaccines do. We know that they're not 100% ironclad, right? There's no vaccine out there that is. But what vaccines are really, really great at is preventing that severe illness, preventing that death in the event that you're fully vaccinated and you do contract the illness. And thankfully, we're now seeing this in our real life scenarios where, we have some people who had breakthrough infection, but we've had no deaths in that group.
Can you clarify the efficacy rate difference of Johnson & Johnson versus the other two? Is J&J less effective?
So it's kind of like teasing out and comparing, I think, apples to oranges and how much we kind of want to tease this out. When you're looking at efficacy rate, again, it depends upon what we're speaking about. If we're looking at overall efficacy from contracting COVID-19, not talking about degree of symptoms, not talking about hospitalizations, but just the fact of contracting the virus. Johnson & Johnson is a little less than the Pfizer and the Moderna in terms of overall protection from contracting the illness. But when you look at, in my mind, the important effects of vaccinations, which is protecting you from getting really sick and protecting you from coming into a hospital and protecting you obviously from death, they're all in that 90% and above range. So they're all doing that. And I think it's important when you read about those numbers that you kind of understand that difference. Johnson & Johnson was also studied in a lot of different demographics and locations. And perhaps it was a little less effective, in countries other than the United States for many reasons. But here in the United States, we know that it's right up there with Pfizer and Moderna from, again, keeping you from getting ill from COVID out of the hospital and death.
Since mRNA vaccination techniques are not new, what does the 2 decades of data suggest are potential long-term side effects of this technology?
Yeah, so it's looking good. I mean, we've used mRNA technology even in some medical therapies for, hemoglobinopathies, for some different medical conditions that aren't very common, I think, to the public. And again, the safety profile looks good. We would never even study, if we didn't see that initial safety data in other types of diagnoses that technology was being deployed for, it would never even be able to be on the market. No one would want to kind of start, putting confidence and dollars behind something that they knew would eventually fail. So, I can tell you, I continue to be amazed at mRNA technology and the safe and the effectiveness of it. And I think it's kind of a turning point, in medical therapies that we're going to start seeing even in the future to come from this. I think there's going to be a lot more resources put into this type of technology, again, because of the robustness of its immune response as well as its safety profile.
And one last question related to that, would you see this technology being used to ultimately help with flu vaccines?
Yeah, yep, I do. And it's interesting you asked that because that's kind of where the scientific community is talking about this. We know on a good year for influenza, in the past, if we had 60% efficacy, we'd say, hey, that's pretty good. Flu and COVID aren't the same animal in terms of, respiratory virus, and there could be different reasons that affect that efficacy range. But in terms of, getting that nice immune response in a safe manner and in a sustainable manner, mRNA seems to be where all the eyes are looking in that vaccine market, and that's not excluding, influenza. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this.
Thank you, Dr. Brzezinski. And I think that wraps up our questions that we had coming in. We appreciate everybody's time and attention today, and hopefully you were able to get some additional information and learn some things maybe that you didn't know before, or get some additional reassurance. Again, just want to thank you all for your time and attention, and we hope everybody gets vaccinated.